Today, we are going to hear directly from USAID colleagues from Egypt, Indonesia, and Global Health on lessons learned from their scholarship programming. We have pre-recorded our panel to help reduce technology and time zone challenges. If you have any questions or comments throughout our time together today, please use the Q&A feature in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen or use the chat feature. First, to kick things off, we will hear pre-recorded remarks from the former acting administrator of USAID, Gloria Steele, about the transformative role that a USAID higher education scholarship played for her personally and how it changed the trajectory of her career.
One of my most enduring memories growing up in the Philippines was listening to my mother's stories about American generosity and the lasting legacies which Americans left behind in the Philippines. The most important legacy, she pointed out, was the public education system, which started with the arrival of Famosites in 1901 in the Philippines, when the first group of educators from Harvard, Yale, Cornell, and other universities arrived in the country. With their arrival, education, which was until that time only available to the elite, became widely available to the entire population. Fortuitously, many years later, as an entry-level analyst at the Philippine Department of Agriculture, I became a beneficiary of the American generosity that my mother often talked about. I was offered a scholarship by USAID Philippines for a master's degree in agricultural economics at Kansas State University. The scholarship that I received from USAID was a dream come true for me. I always wanted to have a master's degree, especially in the United States, but could never afford it. The higher level technical, analytical, and critical thinking skills that I gained enabled me to formulate better thought out, more defensible policy recommendations to the Secretary of Agriculture. This led to many very substantive and highly gratifying roles that I subsequently assumed throughout my career. In the Department of Agriculture, for example, I was promoted from being a junior analyst to being the key policy advisor to the Secretary of Agriculture on some of the most important executive functions of the department: the pricing, marketing, and trade policies for the Philippines' most important commodities. Armed with my experience at the Philippine Department of Agriculture and my master's degree at Kansas State University, I audaciously applied and was accepted to work at USAID Washington in 1980 when I migrated to the United States. As a new hire, what I learned at Kansas State University enabled me to work shoulder to shoulder with professors at Michigan State University, the University of Wisconsin, and Ohio State University when I served as the AOR for 3 separate applied research projects, one on food security, another on land tenure, and the third on agricultural credit. During my time at USAID, I rose from being this young immigrant from the Philippines to being a senior DAA in 3 of USAID's biggest bureaus at that time. And I capped my career at USAID serving as acting administrator before the Senate confirmation of Samantha Power. The scholarship that USAID Philippines gave me in the 1970s opened doors for me that I know would not have been possible without it. For this reason, I spent my time at USAID seeking opportunities to give back. Creating access to education, especially higher education, has been the centerpiece of my give back strategy. Programs across all sectors, in agriculture, in health, economic growth, environment, or democracy, should include opportunities for scholarships in higher education. In fact, my own scholarship came from agriculture funding. Indeed, if USAID is to successfully help partner countries become resilient and self-reliant on a sustainable basis, investing in human capital, especially in higher education, is crucial. An American philosopher, William James, once said that the greatest use of one's life is to spend it for something that will outlast it. Investing in human capital gives us the opportunity to do just that.
Gloria's story really showcases how a USAID-funded scholarship made a difference in her life. Gloria's story is also highlighted in the higher education retrospective but hearing from her directly about how transformative the scholarship was for her professional development is just so impactful. I want to thank her for being a champion for higher education. Now we'll hear from a panel of USAID colleagues that currently manage USAID scholarship programming that helped to inform all of the resources in the toolkit we're launching today. We'll be hearing from Marilyn Crane, who manages One Health Workforce Next Gen. Then we have Mary Ashok and Sama Eid, who are both with USAID Egypt, and Hanif Salah from USAID Indonesia. I'm especially glad that we were able to hear today from Hanif, as he will be retiring from USAID Indonesia at the end of the month. First, I'd like to start off by asking Marilyn from One Health Workforce Next Gen, and then Mary from USAID Egypt to explain a bit more about their programming and why their operating unit wanted to create a higher education scholarship program.
USAID approaches global health security using a One Health approach. And it's this idea that the health of people is connected with the health of animals in our shared environment. And so when we're looking at that, we noticed that there was a lack of wildlife professionals, that there were quite a number of human health, public health doctors, nurses, frontline workers, but the wildlife professionals were missing. And when we're thinking about global health security, we're looking at the environment, and around approximately 70-75% of infectious disease comes from zoonosis, which are diseases that originate in animals in the environment and then cross over to humans. COVID-19 is a great example of that. Ebola, those are, the ones that are more of the pandemics, but, anthrax or there's just a whole number of diseases like that. And so when we were looking at the workforce needs in regions of Africa and Southeast Asia, we realized that the wildlife management component, where most of these diseases are originating, was lacking. And so if we wanted to have a stronger workforce that's better prepared to address emerging pandemic threats, infectious disease threats, AMR, all kinds of things, that we needed to bolster up the wildlife leg.
Egypt has a very large public higher education system with internationally ranked and recognized universities and hundreds of thousands of students. But nonetheless, whole segments of Egyptian society have been left out. USAID Egypt introduced scholarship programming to reduce social inequities by empowering bright young Egyptians from all over the country, especially the most marginalized, and granting them opportunities to further their studies and skills in sectors that can contribute to Egypt's long-term development. USAID Egypt enjoys robust congressional support for scholarship programming that provide fully funded undergraduate scholarships to talented men and women from underserved communities throughout Egypt to study at premier Egyptian universities in fields that are critical to Egypt's economic development. The scholarships that we are providing approach undergraduate scholarships with a holistic approach, not just tuition funding, but leadership programs, community service, entrepreneurship training, extracurricular activities, English language training, study abroad, and so many other activities.
Thanks, Marilyn and Mary. Both of your comments really connect well to why we thought it was important to include products in the toolkit, like the good practices for scholarships embedded in larger activities, which you can see on the screen now. These products, which I'll refer to throughout the webcast, are meant to guide USAID staff through all of the elements needed to design and manage effective scholarship programming, especially across different technical sectors. Next, we are going to hear from Hanif, who has managed the Indonesia program to extend scholarships to achieve sustainable impacts, or Prestasi for short. This is a scholarship program that ran from 2011 to 2020. Prestasi brought together multiple sectors for short-term training and master's degree opportunities offered both in Indonesia and in the United States. Here's a little bit more about the objectives of Prestasi and who was involved.
The main objective of these scholarships is to improve the leaderships and technical skills of young Indonesian professionals, both in the public and private sectors. If we see the implementation of the program from the very beginning until the end, the program went very well. All scholars returned to Indonesia and back to their institutions. Some of them received further degrees from different resources. When we created the scholarship program, we had economic growth, democracy and governance, health, education, and environment. So we have covered all 5 sectors in the mission, supporting USAID Indonesia scholarship program.
We'll hear more from Hanif later, but you can also learn more about Prestasi and the Prestasi case study in the toolkit. As you can hear from our colleagues, scholarship programming can be an effective intervention across sectors. As you begin to think about incorporating scholarships as a tool for development, it's important to connect the objectives of the scholarship to your development objectives and USAID policy. What development objectives does the activity hope to achieve? Let's go back to Marilyn and One Health Workforce to hear from her.
The scholarship activity was really designed to address that lack in wildlife management and surveillance. Another element that's important when looking at our global health security approach to workforce capacity is this idea of soft skills and technical skills, and also having the right balance between the two. And so we also intended this program to not only fill the technical gap with the wildlife professionals, but to ensure that these professionals not only have the expertise in wildlife management and surveillance, but they also have the soft skills in leadership, communication, management. And so that's kind of like a sub-objective or development objective for the embedded scholarship.
Scholarship activity objectives are closely linked to Egypt's CDC as development objectives and sub-objectives, as well as USAID's education policy and greater US government initiatives. All of our scholarship activities aims to increase access to quality higher education and to help build future leaders who can really participate in achieving Egypt's developmental goals. This is done by enabling our scholars and providing them with the required skills and knowledge that's required by the labor market through comprehensive, inclusive, and adaptable scholarship activities.
Each COR, when they meet with the government officials or with the stakeholders, either government officials or private sectors, they identify sometimes, we need more people, for example, in the health finance. The health office identified that the person who has a background from the health finance is almost retiring, and he was at that time the only person in Indonesia to have that kind of background. So the health office requested that or developed the program description to assign Prestasi to recruit people who are interested to study in the health finance. While the Indonesian government is also at that time developing the national insurance program for all. And with that, we promoted that Prestasi scholarship program is offering scholarship in the health sector from the health finance, one of the field study that we would like to recruit.
When folks hear the words higher education, they often only think about university level education. But USAID higher ed programming includes a wide spectrum of higher ed institutions and scholarships that can support non-degree training and professional development, enrollments in TVETs or community colleges, undergraduate or graduate degrees, in any number of fields. In our 3 examples, you'll hear how scholarship programming focused on training faculty to develop a new master's degree program in health, a non-degree program and master's degree program in Indonesia, and a wide variety of educational opportunities from undergraduate to postgrad in Egypt. As you listen to these stories, think about what levels of education might be most appropriate for your contexts and the questions that you may need to ask yourselves to begin planning for this kind of activity. Sama, what was the appropriate type of education for Egypt, and how did the team make this decision?
USAID Egypt supports a variety of scholarship programs, including scholarships to both public and private higher education institutions for undergraduate and postgraduate opportunities. USAID Egypt currently manages 5 activities with scholarship components. Each one is different from the other. However, the focus of each activity depends on the development priorities of USAID and for Egypt, as well as our consultations with different counterparts. These counterparts include private sector, public sector, ministries, alumni, universities, donors, and implementing partners. I'll give you an example. For USAID scholars, our recent activities that's recently awarded in March 2020, we have 50% of our scholarships in this activity allocated for students to study in the top 3 majors that are of high priority to Egypt development: energy, water, and agriculture. These were specified based on Egypt 2030 development strategy.
So under the original One Health Workforce project, we focused primarily on developing the master's programs. And so that scholarships for that focused on the junior faculty and well, I guess senior faculty too, preparing and giving them the tools and also developing the curricula. So now that we're in a follow-on project, these scholarships have moved from preparing and developing the curricula and kind of setting up the program to supporting students in the actual programs.
The type of the education that we offer for this scholarship program is for master degree program and non-degree program. The short-term training program is more for the technical program supporting each technical office when they need. So because this participant training is really a cross-cutting and serve for every technical offices. So every time that the technical office needs some training purposes or some short-term training, then they contact participant training, whether it is possible to conduct short-term 2-3 weeks or 4 weeks or 8 weeks training program. And also for the master degree program, because most of the activities or project is usually for 5 years. So we cannot really design for a PhD degree program, because then we have to make sure that everyone is completed their program before the activities end.
Thanks to all of you for sharing how you made decisions on your scholarship activities. There are more questions you can ask to ensure that scholarship programming is a good fit for your operating unit in the 7 important questions to ask when designing a higher education scholarship activity resource in the toolkit. So far, we've heard about how higher education scholarship programming can directly support achieving development objectives beyond education and can work at different levels of education. I'd now like to invite Ann Campbell, who led the development of the toolkit. She's a professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies and a premier scholar in the field of international education. Ann's going to talk a bit more about the connections between these ideas and talk us through some of the key documents in the toolkit that can help you think through these first few questions.
Thank you, Samantha. The toolkit is composed of documents that pull from the leading research and practice in administering both domestic and international scholarships worldwide. The research assisted on this project, Ilham Talebe, and I also spoke with approximately 20 USAID scholarship designers, managers, and implementing partners to learn about which issues come up most frequently and how to best approach them. We created this toolkit to provide help in planning for scholarships, in thinking through the life cycle of a scholarship activity, and we included perspectives from USAID, from the implementing partners and host universities, and from students. We focused on projects that use practical ways to incorporate diversity and inclusion in scholarship programming, and we highlight approaches to monitoring, evaluation, and learning from USAID scholarships. There's also a knowledge product that is devoted to higher education storytelling. We also look at standalone scholarship programs, like Prestasi, which Hanif mentioned, and those which are components of larger USAID projects, which aim to reach global health goals, like Marilyn discussed, with the scholarships embedded in the One Health Workforce Next Gen project. In all of these tools, we want to call attention to the idea of scholarship holders as partners to achieve development aims, and to think about the full life cycle of a scholarship, from designing the program and recruiting applicants, all the way through to when participants graduate and become alumni. And back to you, Samantha.
Thanks, Anne, for sharing more about how and why we developed the toolkit. We've heard a lot about the transformative nature of higher education. I'd like to pause here and invite you all to share in the chat how access to higher education transformed your life or career. Now I'd like to go back to our panelists to share about how they determine the size and scope of their scholarship activities.
But at that time, when we designed the program, every technical office reviewed the statement of work and also the limit of the tag of the activity. And they agree to have the program for 16 million for Prestasi 3. And at the time when we recruit students, we always ask every technical office to contribute how many scholarships that they would like to provide. So this is a kind of a commitment in advance from every technical office that they agree to support Prestasi or scholarship program from USAID Indonesia.
USAID is very fortunate to have robust congressional supports for its scholarship programming.
Since 1979, USAID Egypt has invested more than $300 million in higher education scholarships in Egypt. And this have dramatically improved the long-term prospects of thousands of low-income students in Egypt.
The size and scope of the programs depends on the resources available and the amount of funding under the congressional support.
You know, really, I think the workforce assessment and that initial stage where you understand what the actual gaps are kind of helps give you a sense of the number of workers that you might need. But it also, you know, was important to understand the employability. So there may be a need for certain kinds of workers, but if there are not positions or jobs, then you can train them up, but not actually have an impact. And so it was really important as well to understand, you know, what the labor market's ability was to employ the graduates from this program.
Marilyn, that's a really great point about employment opportunities. Higher education itself is not a job creator. So it's really important to know what the local labor market can support and ensure that we are helping to improve the employability of graduates. We're going to shift focus a bit. If scholarship programming isn't intentional about inclusion, they can end up giving more opportunities to people who are privileged, helping to perpetuate the myth that higher education is an investment just for the elite. Which is why I was really curious to hear how the operating units diversified who received their scholarships. Mary, how did USAID Egypt design their scholarship programming for inclusion?
USAID designed scholarships with inclusion at the forefront, requiring gender parity, geographical diversity, and disability inclusion. For example, there is a strict gender balance requirement for most USAID scholarships, in which 50% of scholarship recipients must be female. Geographical diversity is a very important component of a scholarship as well, and scholarships must have student representation from each of Egypt's 27 governorates. Our scholarship activities are dedicated to inclusive education. For example, one of our scholarship activities expanded its work with PWDs by establishing disability support centers at 5 Egyptian public universities to serve and empower students with disabilities in all university faculties. As a result, our scholarship programs have led to important policy changes around inclusion in higher education in Egypt. For example, as a direct result of USAID's advocacy efforts, students with visual impairments are now allowed to study in fields like commerce that rely heavily on graphs and visual materials. These disability centers continue to establish and advocate for university-wide policies, procedures, and activities to ensure equal access to higher education for all Egyptians.
It started from the very beginning for Prestasi scholarship program that we would like to support people from disadvantaged area. Prestasi 3 also mentioned that Prestasi 3 would like to work with the Indonesian government and especially for the government official. So the implementing partner or the contractor knows exactly what the mission is looking for. And then Prestasi developed the plan of the outreach and submit to us, to me as the COR, to be reviewed and approved on the plan of the outreach. And then when it is approved, they do the promotion through newspapers, radios, television, and then go to the site visit and meet people. For women recruitment, we always encourage women to apply, and we also announce that women will have more additional score when reviewing the document for the first step. And we are happy that the participants is almost equal between men and women.
These are really great examples to demonstrate how you can design scholarships for inclusion. To help with this process, we've included a resource about designing for inclusion that has a series of questions you can go through when thinking about this process. And as you're thinking about scholarship programming, it's really helpful to have a realistic timeline. Trying to fit various scholarship activities into a typical USAID 5-year award can be tricky at times, especially when trying to align USAID timelines with academic calendars. And COVID-19 has not made this any easier. I'm curious to hear how everyone designed their timelines. Mary, can you go first? What did you consider when planning the timeline for Egypt's scholarship portfolio?
We consider not only the time needed for designing a comprehensive and holistic scholarship program, which requires at least 1 year of design planning, but also differing academic calendars and unexpected events that may prolong implementation. In Egypt, we determined that activity start dates should begin at least 3 to 6 months before the beginning of academic year to ensure ample time for announcements, recruitment efforts, and final selection of scholarship recipients. We found it helpful to anticipate the possibility that not every student will graduate on time as well. Unexpected events like illness, poor academic performance, family or personal emergencies mean a student may require an additional semester or 2 to graduate. This needs to be taken into consideration also when determining the end of activity date.
the other thing to think about with embedded scholarships is sometimes it's in service of a larger development objective. So in this case, we were also designing a new master's program. So that lengthened the amount of time for startup, because not only was there the need for the curricula to be developed, and but there was also a need for the university approval process to go through. If it's just an embedded scholarship program, sometimes that's fine, just at the dean level. But if you're actually tying it to a new master's program or something like that, then you would want to build in at minimum 18 months, and that's if you're pretty, like, you've really got the support in advance, like from the earliest days.
In the program description, the technical office identified the target audience, and then followed by the outreach activities and selection process, pre-academic training, and then pre-departure orientation. All of those process is done here in country. We provided like 6 months pre-academic training in country to improve their English language, because Prestasi is the only scholarship program here in Indonesia that require only 450 TOEFL score. Other scholarship program required more than 500. This is because we see a lot of people with a very strong technical capacity, but they are like in English. So we decided to have a less English language program and then provided the English preparation course here. And those timeline from developing the program description until sending students to the United States, it takes about 12 months.
Thanks, everyone. These are really important considerations, and a reminder that scholarship support may be for students to study in their home country, the United States, or a third country. So there are a lot of considerations to take into account during the design that might affect the timeline. Hanif mentioned the TOEFL, or the Test of English Language as a Foreign Language. The TOEFL score is the standardized English test to determine how proficient a person's English is. Most scholarships only accept applicants who score 500 or more. What USAID Indonesia did was plan extra time in a pre-departure orientation for their scholarship recipients so they could identify talented people who just needed a bit more help with their English. This is one example of how to further include other talented people in your scholarship programming. The other key area that we want to be aware of is how to identify and avoid risks associated with scholarships. Hanif, let's start with you. How did you identify and avoid risks associated with scholarship programming in Prestasi?
The co-funding mechanism is really helpful in reducing the risk and also the failure of the program, because we involve, like, for example, ministries or agencies, Indonesian agencies, to select them prior they apply for the scholarship program for Prestasi. For example, if we are working with a Ministry of Justice and they have or decided to support 4 students, they usually do the recruitment within the institutions before sending or allowing them to apply for Prestasi scholarship program. And we always say, if we would like to have 4 students supported by Prestasi, then we would like to have at least 8 candidates to be interviewed and to be selected. And this is very helpful to reduce the risk of the scholarship program, because then buy-in from the Indonesian government or the stakeholders is very strong.
When you think and you hear about scholarship programs, you often hear people express concern about brain drain, and I think this might be where this question is headed. So with our programming with embedded scholarships, one of the things that we have focused on is providing the training in country or in third country, which is to say not having the scholarships in the United States. And with the training, when possible, linking graduation with employment opportunities in country. This helps ensure that a greater likelihood that scholarship recipients will stay in country and contribute to the workforces of their country.
With both Hanif and Marilyn's examples, I want to highlight the fact that their respective scholarship programming work to make sure that the next steps after graduation for the students were as clear as possible. If a student graduates into the workforce with no clear job opportunity or next step, there's a greater risk of the scholar leaving their home country or not being employed. We often think that USAID engagement with scholarship students ends when they graduate, but it's also a good practice to think more about alumni engagement. I wanted to turn back to Anne to see if she can share more.
Thank you, Samantha. For many of us, we think of the scholarship ending once the last payment is made or the student graduates. However, there are so many other ways to continue the relationship with the scholarship holder when they become an alumnus of the program. USAID scholarship alumni go on to work for USAID or other US government agencies. They work for the organizations that partner with USAID. They take up leadership positions in their governments, or teach at universities, or lead other innovations at home. And they engage in many other activities to help advance the goals of USAID in their home countries. One of the knowledge products in this toolkit is engaging alumni from USAID higher education scholarship programming. This is a good practice paper focused specifically on ways to engage alumni as partners in development and to continue to engage them in reaching USAID's and national development goals. Of course, employment is an important and a key element of successful transitioning after studies. Some universities have strong employment advising centers or career counselors, and some scholarship activities include professional workshops like resume writing or job interviewing as part of the scholarship program. Conducting market scans during the program design is also a recommended strategy when planning a USAID scholarship activity. And please don't forget about the power of networks. Connecting graduates to open job opportunities across USAID partners is a great strategy. Alumni associations are also good ways to connect graduates to others who are working in the field to find future positions. And now back to you, Samantha.
Thanks for sharing, Anne. Next, I wanted to see if any of our panelists had any extra tips to share. Sama, what else would you share with USAID colleagues that are thinking about incorporating scholarships into their portfolios?
It is important also to anticipate the emotional and mental health needs for these students, especially at this age, and with a lot of changes that happens in their life. New living conditions, more competitive environments, different social backgrounds. So in addition, and to ensure mental health services are available to students all the time, we provide them with workshops on well-being, resilience, and communication. The application process itself has to be clear and transparent to all our applicants. We utilize a holistic application and selection process with questions related to academic, to extracurricular, and family circumstances. We even go more and do in-person home visits to learn more about our applicants and about our students. And this helps us to know more details about them and to tailor our program to accommodate all their needs through the scholarship activity and through the process.
Over this last year, we've learned the importance of taking care of our mental health, and I'm so glad that this has really become an area of focus for USAID and our scholarship programming. Think back to your own collegiate experience. It's a real time of transition, especially for students who may be first-generation college students, like I was myself. There are needs beyond those that are financial. Taking care of social, emotional, and mental health is important as well. And there are ideas to help you plan for non-financial support to students included in the Beyond Financial Assistance, Extracurricular Programming, and USAID Scholarships resource in the toolkit. Sama, could you also share more about how USAID Egypt scholarship programming has helped to improve outcomes for students, as well as help the mission achieve sustainable results?
Working with the scholarships and with the scholars in this age is, for me, it's an exciting and interesting experience. And it's always motivating to all of us to see the students before the program and after the program. And also to listen to them, how that was a life-changing opportunity for them. A lot of lessons have been learned to all of us through the process. Like we learned to take the time to build strong relationships with different stakeholders, because we have learned that this is very essential in garnering consistent support for activities. We've learned also that it's very important to know your target beneficiaries, even from the beginning of the design process. This helps you to design well the different components of the scholarship activity, and also to be selective with your applicants, and also to be more capable of helping them to succeed and to achieve the goals of the activity. Now, blind students are able to study in more fields of study that were not allowed to them earlier. Also, our activities were the first to introduce career guidance and counseling to scholarship recipients, garnered great results. And that happens through our activities, especially to public universities who did not have the concept of career counseling or career guidance before USAID scholarship activities. And that helped us to expand introducing university centers for career development in Egypt public universities, and broadening the reach of increasing employability and for our graduates, particularly women and youth.
With the embedded scholarships, it's our hope that we will have in place wildlife surveillance and management professionals who are capable of and who have the skills and are able to prevent, detect, and respond to these pandemic, epidemic, and other public health emergencies as early as possible.
The large scope of Egypt's scholarship programs are a result of strong strategic initiatives between the US and Egypt, like the Higher Education Initiative, Cairo Initiative. All of them sought to provide opportunities, skills, and knowledge for Egypt's leaders of tomorrow.
Thank you to Mary, Sama, Hanif, Marilyn, and Anne for sharing your experience and expertise with everyone today. One of the things that's helpful to see with scholarships is that they're impacting not only the lives of individuals and their ability to help meet a country's development goals, but it's also great when you can point to institutional and system level changes that are happening that will last long beyond the duration of a USAID-funded scholarship activity. Whether it's helping to introduce the concept of career planning to public universities in Egypt, helping develop new master's degrees in West Africa, or improving health management systems in Indonesia, these are all investments not only for the scholarship recipient themselves, but far beyond. From hearing Gloria's story to these examples from Egypt, Indonesia, and global health, I hope that these have helped you all think about how higher education scholarships or exchanges could be implemented in your technical sectors. We've mentioned them throughout our conversation today, and the new USAID Higher Education Scholarship Toolkit is now available on education links. It contains 11 resources to help in designing, implementing, and managing higher education scholarship programming. This is just the start of the toolkit, and we hope to add additional products in the near future. Now I'm sure that many of you have specific questions, and you've already been adding them to the chat about how to incorporate higher ed scholarships into your programming across sectors. Anne is going to rejoin me, and we're happy to help address these questions about the toolkit or scholarship programming in general. Please feel free to continue to add questions to the chat or even use the raise hand function to pose your question. We're going to get started with a question that came in that said, we only receive basic education funding. Can basic education funds be used for higher ed programs such as scholarships? So this is a really great question. And you don't need higher ed funds for higher ed scholarships. So you can use basic education funding for scholarship programming to support what I like to think of as higher ed for basic ed. So we have had programming like in Nigeria through a Reading for Transformation activity that supported folks from Nigeria to come to Florida State University to pursue master's degrees and fields related to elementary education and reading programming. So yes, you can use basic education funding for scholarship programming, as well as any other color of funding as well. And I'm happy to be a resource in my role as Senior Advisor for Higher Education to help folks in thinking about programming in this space. And I'd like to turn to you for the next two questions that are interrelated. Can you talk a bit about if scholarship programs are considered to be cash transfer programs, and also talk about the experience that we have in going beyond the financial support for tuition in terms of having stipends for transportation, internet, meals, kind of the ancillary expenses that come with higher education beyond tuition?
Yes, thank you. And good morning, everyone from California. So this question about whether scholarships are conditional cash transfers is a really good one. In most models, they're not. The payments are usually sent to the higher education institution directly for things like tuition, sometimes meal plans, and other ancillary items, fees, etc. But at the same time, there usually is a stipend that's given to the individual to support their livelihood while they are studying. So there is money given directly to individuals, but it's not typically considered a conditional cash transfer program. The larger issue of the expenses and to cover all of the various things that are required to focus on the studies while during the scholarship, this is a really good question as well. And there is quite a complicated budget that needs to be considered for supporting students, especially those who are underrepresented in higher education. So this can include things like credits for phones, so people can have access to the internet from the device that they have. It can include transportation, housing, other things that really make the experience possible so that they don't necessarily have to work or do other things that will divert from their focus on study. And there's some really interesting models out there. One, for example, is to provide small stipends to actually prepare the materials to apply. So in Latin America, some of the USAID scholarships actually give small stipends to go for bus fees to go collect documents like transcripts in order to apply. So considering all of these fees and expenses is a really good strategy, especially to reach students who haven't had similar opportunities.
Great, thanks so much, Anne. We also had a question come in around, are there safeguards in place to make sure that scholarships don't contribute to brain drain in host countries? And I think Marilyn mentioned this in her comments about One Health Workforce, but yes, and in one of the products that we have in the toolkit, looking at helping to identify risks, brain drain is definitely a real risk. One myth that we'd like to bust in scholarship programming is that folks have to come to the United States to study. Actually, the majority of our USAID scholarship support are for students to study in their home country, or as Marilyn mentioned, in a third country, usually within the region. That's one way that we can help to prevent brain drain. And it's a really great connection to some of our other higher ed programming work that really has worked over the last 30, 40, 50, even 60 years to build in-country higher ed institutional capacity. We've made a lot of investments in improving the quality of education in our partner countries, and so a lot of our scholarship programming actually takes place in country. Another aspect that Marilyn and others mentioned from the panel is making sure that those scholarships supports the fields that we're supporting and study, that there's alignment with local labor market needs. So making sure that if folks are coming to the US to study, that when they return back home, there are job opportunities for them. Again, as I mentioned in the webinar, in the panel, really making sure that we are aligned with local labor market needs and recognize that higher education itself is not inherently a job creator. So we need to make sure that we're looking at the employment opportunities that are available. And there's another question that's come in, and they're coming in fast and furious, so thanks everyone. So you'll see me looking at another screen as we try to keep track of them all. There is a question about, similar to Fulbright, can the must return home or pay back the cost of scholarships? Have you seen that being built into scholarship programming?
Yeah, thanks for this question. So how I see it in programs worldwide is that there's typically a binding contract model where there is this formal agreement that the scholarship holder will sign to say that they will return home or they will take up employment in a certain position afterwards. And then there's another model that's called a social contract. And the social contract is non-binding, but it sets clear expectations of what the scholarship is for, how give back can be achieved. And it really is preferred by scholarship holders because the overall, it's very clear of what is expected for those who have been given the scholarship. And in my research and working with scholarship holders across the world, they really do want this clarity of what's expected to them to achieve the goals because they're so grateful for the opportunity typically. So I think that there are these models around binding contracts, but a more successful approach is in the social contract of setting these goals early, of keeping communication with scholarship holders throughout their process, and then working with them as alumni to achieve the goals for development that were in place when the scholarship was initially funded.
Great, thanks, Anne. I'm going to do one more question that came in from the chat, and then Cynthia, I do see the raised hand from you. A question of how does, if going to the US on scholarship, does USAID partner with Department of State Education USAID for training? And a question as well of what is the collaboration between USAID and Department of State? So that's really done differently at the country level. There's a number of countries where there's close collaboration with our colleagues in the public affairs section of Department of State that is often the one sponsoring the scholarships from the embassy side. And I know, for example, in the Philippines, there's a really rich collaboration between USAID and the embassy on alumni engagement, making sure that the Alumni Association for USG scholarships is ran in collaboration with both USAID and Department of State, and that they do really rich alumni engagement through small grants programs and find ways to continue to engage that alumni. So there's a lot of opportunities to make those connections between the programming that the Department of State does in scholarships and exchanges. On the Education USA question, typically if a USAID scholarship program is sending students to the United States, there's a different relationship with the US partner higher education institution. So that's typically, I will say, that's identified sometimes through the direct award or the contract in terms of what university, community college, or other type of higher ed institution that student might be studying at. But Education USA centers are really great resources within our partner countries for students to find out about American higher educational opportunities. I am conscious of time. I know we have more questions, but unfortunately we don't have more time, but we have captured the questions, and we will find a way to get answers out. I did want to thank everyone for the questions, and again reiterate that DDI, our team in higher education, are happy to assist your OU as you think about how to incorporate scholarships in your programming. We'd also like to invite you to let us know what else do you need to be thinking about how to incorporate higher education scholarships and exchanges in your programming. What other tools would you like to see in the toolkit? Please feel free to add that in the chat. And as we close, I'd like to thank the Leading Through Learning Global Platform Contract for their help in producing today's webcast. If you're interested in learning more about USAID's cross-sectoral work in higher education, I welcome you to join our USAID Higher Education Working Group. This is a group of colleagues across sectors and regions at USAID that are interested in using higher education as a tool to advance development outcomes. You can search for the Higher Ed Working Group on our USAID Google Groups or email me to be added. We're also super excited to share that we'll be launching the Higher Education Learning Network as an external higher education community of practice in 2022. You can find more information on how to join that network in the link that's being added to the chat. Thank you, everyone, especially our panelists, for your time in attending today's Toolkit launch. I'm super excited about the opportunities for us to use scholarships as a tool to achieve development objectives. And I really hope that it's inspired you to find new ways to incorporate scholarships and exchanges into your technical areas. Have a great rest of your day or evening, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks, everyone.